Hello, everybody. This is Sharon Dittmar with the Mid-America region of the UUA, and welcome to our webinar, HR 101. I have with me today Rob Mola, who's the Director of HR, Human Relations or Resources at the Unitarian Universalist Association, and we are fortunate enough to have him.
I'm going to jump into policy manuals, so I'm taking a little different shift here because I think every organization with employees needs a basic policy manual or an employee handbook. Folks call these by different things, or the HR manual, whatever you name it. But there's a good reason to have these, and it doesn't have to be complicated. They don't have to be long. They can be fairly simple and straightforward. But how do you answer some of these questions that always come up? So questions like, can we hire somebody who's a member of the congregation? And you want to have that, you want to think about that before the person who's a member of your congregation applies for the job that you have open. And I have pretty strong feelings about that. I'm not going to dive into that here, but if you have questions about that, I would urge you to contact the folks in church staff finances or talk to your regional field life staff, congregational field life staff. They will help you think through that one. Do you allow outside employment? So let's say you have an employee who wants to hold another job. Is that something that you would permit? That should go in your employee manual. What happens if the employee needs a leave of absence? How do they ask for that? And are they allowed to ask for that? Can they take unpaid leaves of absence? Do they have their paid time off before they go unpaid? Those things should be spelled out in a policy manual. Simple questions like, how much off am I permitted? How much vacation time, how much sick time, how much personal time, or do you just have one bank of time that the employee is permitted to take? Or do they get any vacation time at all? Those are things that you can spell out in your policy manual. What happens to the employee's vacation time or sick time or personal time when they quit? Do they get paid for that? You don't want to be having these conversations when the employee quits, the day, trying to figure out, are we supposed to pay them for this or not? This should be spelled out in the employee manual. If employee is experiencing harassment or bullying or some other issues, how should they handle those? Who should they speak to? How do they raise those issues in a safe way? What's your policy against harassment and bullying and all of those things? Those you want to spell out procedures for responding to them. You're going to want to have policies on technology. So can people use email for personals? Those are simple questions that people oftentimes ask. You can address those in your policy manual as well. And when do you conduct performance evaluations, and what do those look like? I would put those in the policy manual as well. Those, and there's a million other questions, and a link here for you. The Office of Church Staff Finances has a brand new model policy manual for congregations. You can take this and then work with it. It's a great starting point if you don't have a policy manual in place, or if you do have a policy manual in place, it's a great place to go through and check and see if you've got the basics in there. Do you have everything that you need to have? Now, one caveat here is this sample policy manual needs a review by your own employment attorney, because we cannot, at the associational level, we cannot handle, we can't address every state-specific employment detail that may happen through policy. So certain states and certain cities require amount of sick time, for example. So some states, California, I believe, requires 48 hours a year of sick time for full-time employees. Other states are requiring 1 hour for every 30 hours, 1 hour of sick time for every 30 hours worked. So it depends on the place. So you're going to want to work with your employment attorney who knows state-specific laws to help you review your policy manual once you've got it in place. But this sample manual, really great place to start, and I highly recommend it. Now, here's what I would include in the employee manual, and you'll see this in the sample manual as well. Some sort of welcome to your employee, our mission, what's the organizational structure. The organizational structure may be opaque to your staff. So it's nice to be able to spell that out. Who reports to who? How does the board interact with the minister? Is policy governance in place? Do you have modified policy governance? Do you have some other structure in place that may help your staff understand all of the different committees and boards and task forces that may exist in the congregation? And what's a short history of the congregation? Help them understand that as well. There's a place for general policies. So there may be dozens of these, or you may have a few simple ones. Excuse me. I would include a harassment, anti-harassment policy, your equal opportunity policy, and anti-discrimination policies, which basically state that don't discriminate against people, either in employment or in hiring. Spell out your work week. What does your work week look like? What is the starting day and end date of your work week? This is important for calculating overtime. So does your work week start? I've got my friends are talking. Does your work week start on Sunday and end on Saturday? Or does it start on Monday and end on Sunday? That's important for when you're calculating overtime. What breaks and meal times do you permit your staff? And are they paid or unpaid? What are the behavioral expectations that you hold for your staff? And this might involve anything from covenantal type behavior to addressing grievances that may come up between each other. You know, how do they talk to each other, or working with members of the congregation. And then technological expectations. So what technology do you provide? Email policies that you may have. Can email, as I said, be used for personal reasons or not? Are people allowed to blog or post on social media? Do they need to provide statements that they're doing this personally, or are they representing the congregation? So those are things that you're going to want to think about when you're putting together your policies. You'll probably have a section on all the benefits and leaves of absences that you may be offering. These would include insurances, health insurance, dental insurance, life insurance, disability insurances, time off, paid or unpaid that you may be offering. PTO is paid time off. Who's eligible for the insurances and time off? Do you have to work hours a week to be eligible for time off, paid time off? Or do you have to work so many hours to be eligible for the insurances? So our health plan, for example, requires 750 hours a year to be eligible for the plan. The plan is 1,000 hours, I believe, in a year, in a calendar year. So you're going to want to outline eligibility for the different benefits. What cost sharing options are there? So are you paying 80% of the health insurance for your employees, and then the employee is picking up 20% of the health insurance? Or are you paying 50% and 50%? How are you dividing up those costs? So you'll spell that out in the employee manual as well. And then the other thing I would hit here too is make sure you're outlining what severance is available and when severance is available to your staff. And think about this now and budget for it now before you need to pay attention to it. Because if you have to let an employee go, whether for performance-related reasons or because you're conducting a layoff, you don't want to have to worry about severance at the time that you're letting the employee go. Make sure you have those policies in place first. And remember, in many cases, our congregations are exempt from state unemployment systems. So that means that the employee can go and claim unemployment from the state. And so if you let the employee go, how are they going to survive without some severance? So you're going to want to put in place your severance policies and budget for severance each fiscal year so that you've got money set aside you need to let employees go. So that's something to pay attention to. Um, the Office of Church Staff Finances, I believe, is recommending 1 week of severance per year of service, up to a maximum of 16 weeks of severance um, at this point for reasons of layoff or performance. Um, um, and so pay attention to those things before you need to.
Rob, can I just say,
Sure, of
I'm
course.
so glad you mentioned the severance thing, because I do get a lot of calls and they're like, we don't know what to do. And if we offer severance, we won't be able to pay anyone for 4 months. And I get you're not going to be able to, like, if you're this is the first time you've ever considered this, it's going to take you years to build up to that, but start
Mm-hmm.
building up to it. Like, no magical budgets. Be honest about, at some point in the future, we'll need severance. Let's start saving. I love that.
No magical budgets. Do you know how many times a week I have the conversation with people that there's no magic pot of money that lives in HR?
Can
So
I also, go ahead.
you're absolutely right. These are things that we have to think about. We have to pay attention to as employers. And if we're going to live our UU values and we're going to be responsible employers, we have to think about severance in advance. And then the corollary to this for me is not just at end of employment, is are we paying to compensation? And my next bullet is around compensation at um, at at higher time. So are we paying fair wages to our staff? Are we budgeting appropriately to pay fair wages? So, there's a strong movement for a $15 minimum wage, which in some places would still be a struggle for a lot of people living on $15. But are you having those conversations about what a fair wage would look like in your congregation, in your community, for the staff who work there? And I know where I am on the South Shore of Massachusetts, it's a very high cost area that a lot of our congregations aren't paying people enough money to live in the community where they work. And that's problematic. And it's something we need to pay attention to.
So Rob, if a congregation, so I could see a lot of the fine people listening to this webinar going, uh-oh, we don't have any personal files. Uh-oh, we don't have a policy manual. That policy manual that the UUA has up as a sample, can they use that to get started?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So all of these things, and I'm just, this presentation, I'm just kind of scratching the outside. There's so much that goes into human resources. There's so much that goes into personnel management. I'm giving you some basics here, and I recognize that it may be overwhelming. You may feel like, oh my goodness, oh my gosh, there's just too much here. We don't have any of this. It's overwhelming. Where do we start? What am I going to do? Don't get overwhelmed. Start small. Start with one small thing, whether it's the model employee manual, whether it's just identifying a place to keep the personnel files. That's a good start. And then start gathering the information. Where is employee X materials? Where is employee Y's materials? And start gathering it over time. You don't have to complete everything on day one. Take your time, think through it, talk to the folks on your board, on staff, and start putting these together little by little by little.
So it's okay if you have, like, say you're going to start personnel files. You're like, gosh, we really should have something. And you go around and you can't find the contracts for half your employees and you don't have the letters. You put in there what you can find and you try and get the rest. And it's okay if it takes a while, right? That's good enough?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep, it's good enough. And don't forget, you can talk to your staff and say, hey, we don't have a copy of your hire letter on file. You don't have a copy of that by any chance, and chances are somebody has it in their tucked in their file at home. But there's no reason to feel bad that you haven't done this perfectly from the beginning. One of the things I know about white supremacy culture is this strive for perfection, a strive for efficiency. So, we take this one piece at a time, do what you can do, and if you're having these conversations and um, start with one brick. You don't build a house overnight. Um, it's a brick, and these are your bricks to use to build a thoughtful HR process. I want to jump on compensation in the employee manual. When are reviews scheduled, comp reviews? Do you do them annually, typically annually? How is overtime calculated? Who's eligible for overtime? Those things you might want to outline in your personnel manual as well. And then the same with performance. When are performance reviews handled? And how are grievances handled? What do you do when an employee has a grievance with another employee? How are those handled? You should have a process outlined. Even if it's minimal, the first step is talk to the other employee. The second step is talk to your supervisor. Third step, talk to the senior or the executive director. Fourth step, bring it to the board of trustees. Outline something fairly simple and straightforward. But how should employees get, if they have grievances, if they're having trouble, what should they do? I'm not going to spend any time in depth compensation and back. We could spend days on this. And I want to lift up the Office of Church Staff Finances to you. There's enormous resources here. Gardner, who's our staffing and compensation manager, has put together some brilliant materials for you. And Jan is available to consult with you, and she has compensation consultants who can work with you. So there's a benefits tune-up workbook. So if you're not sure, are your benefits complete? Are you doing correctly? Are you getting the right forms? Are you following requirements of the plans appropriately? What's available for benefits from the UUA? The benefits tune-up workbook is a good place to start. And there's also compensation worksheet and consultants at this website that you can consult with. And I think you'll find an enormous amount of materials and resources available to you. And know that we at the UUA are here to help think through compensation and benefits. There's comp surveys and there's all kinds of data that you may need to refer to when developing and thinking through appropriate comp for your staff. Now, performance evaluations. This is a place that people spend a lot of time thinking about and a lot of time spinning their wheels. And I think that oftentimes people spin their wheels in the wrong direction when they're thinking about performance evaluations. So I'm going to be on my high horse a little bit here because this is very much Rob's philosophy of performance evaluations. But I really believe that giving performance feedback is not a once-a-year activity. If you're doing performance reviews once a year, and that's the only time that you're sitting down with your staff or that your supervisors are sitting with staff or whoever's supervising your employees, it's not enough. And so I think you can do it. I think you can think about performance differently, and it doesn't have to be a heavy burden. So what I like to think about is a continuous, what I call a continuous feedback model. So you're constantly giving, supervisors are constantly giving feedback to their staff, and it doesn't have to be complicated, and it doesn't have to be difficult. but it should be frequent, regular, and ongoing communication between staff and supervisor. And as I said, the documentation is very simple. I'll give you a model here. And what I think about is daily check-ins and weekly meetings, very simple and very short. And I think that so many of the performance issues that land on my desk when I'm talking to folks from congregations who are supervising staff, or even our staff at the association, on the national staff of the association, are because they're not spending time communicating with their staff. So supervisors and staff need to find ways to speak frequently, regularly, and consistently. And that's what I call a continuous feedback model. And I'll give you a sense of what this model looks like. So here's what this looks like to me. And I would start with a daily check-in, 5 minutes. I'll show you what that looks like, very brief. Do a daily check-in. There's a weekly supervision meeting, or just a meeting to talk about projects. You don't have to call it supervision. That might be frightening to some people, but staff and their supervisor should meet once a week for a slightly longer meeting, an hour, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, to talk about what's going on in depth. Then you've got the annual review, which is developmental in my mind. That's not, the annual review should never be punitive. Oftentimes the annual review is the first time your employee has ever gotten feedback from you, and that's not the time for them to get the feedback. The annual review should be a summary of all of the feedback over the course of the year, and it should be looking forward to the next year. And then, of course, a lot of our teams, a lot of your teams may be doing retreats and finding times to meet in group to consider mission and vision and more thoughtful project work that you're working on. And then when things go awry, when things go wrong, that's when you put people on warning, and that's when you develop a performance improvement process. And so let me tell you a little bit about what each of these looks like. So before I dive deep into each one of those, I want to tell you the first rule of HR. The first rule, and I've got lots of them, but the first rule of HR is to set clear expectations with your staff. So whoever's responsible for supervision should be remarkably intent on setting clear expectations. Here's what I want you to do, and here's when it's due. Why are we doing it? Why is this important? People find it difficult to meet their performance expectations if they don't know why they're supposed to do something. How does this fit into our mission? How does this our members? Why is this important? How does this, how are we living out UU values by doing this work? So explain to your staff why they're doing this. What is it that you want them to do? And is it due by? When are they supposed to do these different things? How are they supposed to do it? What tools should they use? And who should be doing it? Who should they be interacting? Who should they be asking for feedback as they do this work? So answer those basic how, what, why, when, where questions for your employees. And then help them set priorities. How does this task fit within the 100 other tasks that they're supposed to be doing? So you need to be setting priorities for your staff and having those discussions about where this is a priority this week, this is not so much a priority, work on this, don't work on that. One of the things that some of you may have come across or actually been in trainings with Susan Beaumont, who does a lot of work around performance and in the congregational world. One of the things that I love about Susan Beaumont's work is that she urges supervisors to own the role of being a supervisor, that it's your responsibility to set priorities and tasks for your employees to define the parameters of when things are going to be done and um, and how they should be done. So supervisors really need to own that authority. And part of that is prioritization. And then another part of setting clear expectations is having a high tolerance for repetition. Um, Oftentimes we say that people don't hear things until they've actually heard it 3 times, or they don't take in things until they've taken it in, until somebody's told them at least 3 times. So you need to set your expectations over and over and over again. Why are we doing this? What is it that you're supposed to do? When is it due? How are we doing it? Who's responsible? Who do you need to work with to get this done? What's the priority? Say it over and over and over again. And so have that high tolerance for repetition. Because if you think you've said it once, if you think you've said it enough, I can guarantee you, it's probably the second rule of HR is you haven't said it enough times. So this daily check-in, so go to our continuous feedback model, the daily check-in. So it should be quick. Supervisors should check in with their staff to 10 minutes each day. And if your staff don't work every day, you don't have to check in with them the days they don't work, but the days they are working. Spend 5 minutes with them. Confirm the day's priorities. What's going on? Is everything okay? Are you having any problems that I need to know about? If you've got a team, who's where? Are people where they're supposed to be? And part of this daily check-in is helping the employee replace to identify the important work over the urgent work, because oftentimes the employee is struggling with all of those urgent things that are coming at them. They're getting lots of emails. They've got 15 people telling them all of the different things that they should be doing. But you as the supervisor, you need to identify the priority, what's important for the employee. So part of your daily check-in is to help the employee figure out what the important piece of work that needs to be done that day, or those important pieces of work that are done that day, rather than the urgencies that will naturally come at them. And then ask the thoughtful question, what will you have completed at the end of your work today? And if you can ask that question and identify that, and the employee delivers on that, you've had a great check-in. So make sure the employee knows that at the end of the day, they're going to communicate to you, I've completed this one thing that we've agreed upon today, or these 3 things that we've agreed upon today. The weekly meeting, this is longer. This might be 20, 30 minutes. And this is where I would suggest that your supervisors spend time talking about the key updates. What happened in the previous week? What are the key projects they've been working on? What's coming up next week that you need to know about? And you're reviewing progress to the milestone projects. So what are the projects that they're responsible for that may take time to do, and what progress are they making each week on those long-term projects? And you want to help them understand that next week, here's the milestone, here's the piece of work that you need to get done for this longer term project. So 3 months from now, we've got this piece of work done. So let's say you've got an employee who's tasked for putting together the personnel files, right? So you're not going to get that done in one day. So what are the pieces that need to get done each week? So over the course of a month, you may have the personnel files put together. So you're going to want to spend some time getting some input and talking to your employee during this 20, 30 minutes. What are the priorities? You may need to reset the priorities because priorities are oftentimes changing. What challenges are they having getting their work done? And this is where you can talk about what those challenges may be. And supervisors should help the employee navigate those challenges. Don't pay attention to this. Okay, this is going to be problematic for us. How are we going to solve this one? And then I like the term from the Disney world of Imagineering. This is a chance to imagine take a few minutes to imagine what could be exciting and interesting about the work. What's creative? What can be creative in this work for the employee? Because people want a chance to be creative and fulfilled in their work. So how can you imagine new creative opportunities for your employee during this time? Are there opportunities for your staff? Make sure you're thinking, part of the continuous feedback model is always thinking about what do we need to learn to do their job better or differently, and how can the person learn more or learn different things. And these learning opportunities don't need to be complicated along. It could be 5 minutes spent in Excel learning a new function, or 10 minutes spent reading the model personnel manual to learn more about how that's put together. But those learning opportunities will be critical. And then review on the back burner. What things haven't we gotten to yet that are always kind of in the background that you're going to need to pay attention to someday, but you don't want them to fall off your list. This is your parking lot or your bike rack for things that you've been talking about that keep coming up in discussions, but that you don't have time or the necessity to pay attention to right now. And when I talked about making documentation simple, this is your documentation for performance for your employees. Use this as your documentation. Have a simple form that you ask your employee to put together each week. What are the key updates that I need to know about? What are we going to discuss? What are the priorities that we have? What are the learning opportunities that we can talk about? And what are we putting on the back burner? 4 simple questions that you can use, and use this, make a little form, use that each week to keep track of what your staff is doing. And then you've got records of all of this. So when it comes time to do your annual performance reviews, or if people aren't meeting their milestones, if they aren't making progress, you've got something that you can refer back to. So you're not making this up when it comes time to deal with performance issues. Now, the annual review. To let this sink in, it's not about the form. I have so many conversations with folks about what form should we be using, and people obsess endlessly about what the form would look like. The answer is, it's not about the form. The form does not matter. The conversation is what matters. You can Google performance review form or annual evaluation form and find hundreds of thousands of examples of forms that you can use. The Office of Church Staff Finances has put together some sample materials for you to look at too. I would ask that you not obsess about the forms. What's critical is these questions here. The conversation that you want to have, excuse me, the conversation that you want to have is, how does your review process serve the mission of your congregation and the developmental goals of your organization and your staff? So ask yourself these questions, and these are the questions that we use at the UUA on our staff evaluation forms. How is your employee serving the mission of the UUA? So question number 1 for your annual review form could be, how is your employee serving the mission of the congregation? Question number 2, what do they need to know? And this is a chance to summarize the feedback that you've spoken about over the course of the year. What do they need to focus on? And what do they need to learn? Here's a chance to talk about developmental goals. And then, what are their goals for the next year? So here's where you'll set a number of goals, and they shouldn't be exhaustive. There shouldn't be dozens of goals, but what are the 3, 4, or 5 important goals that you should focus on for the next year or the next review cycle? If you can answer these simple questions in a review conversation with your staff, you're doing brilliant work. And then the annual review should also be a chance for you and your employee to embrace an opportunity to reflect on the past year and set up the employee for success for the next year. So it's developmental, it's conversational, it's thoughtful. It's not the place to tackle performance issues for the first time.
Rob, I
So
also see people using it as, people say to me like, well, have they done a performance review? That's how we'll know if we can give them a raise. Well, what do you think about, people almost want like to check this box before they can talk about a raise. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that's a really good question. I like to uncouple the performance review from the raise process for a couple of reasons. One is if the employee is, if the review and the raise are tied together. So if the employee knows at the end of the review they're going to get a raise, they're not focused on the review itself. They're not focused on the conversation around service to the mission, around learning, around development, and meeting goals. They're focused on the bottom line. They're focused on the how much am I going to get at the end of this? They're focused on the check boxes that say, if you meet your goal, you're going to get a 2% raise. If you've exceeded your goals, you're going to get a 3% raise. They're not focused on the they're not focused on um, the message that you're trying to share with them. And remember, the review should be a conversation. And the other piece is um, most organizations, I'm believing, have fairly small budgets for raises. And so in most cases, the raise is actually just keeping up with cost of living, if anything. So I like to see, a once a year cost of living increase at least as a part of the conversation, but that doesn't have to be part of the review. Um, and what I know is that the latest research around reviews is when organizations tie reviews to compensation. So let's say you have a review form that says, if you're checking boxes and you get a 5 on the review form, you're getting a 2% increase. If you're getting a 7 on your review form, you're getting a 3% increase. If you get a 10 on your review form, you're getting a 4% increase. What the recent research is that those ratings show more about the rater and the rater's own biases than the employee's performance. So those sorts of ratings that are tied directly to how much an employee gets are actually quite biased and aren't very accurate at all. So that's another reason why I like to separate reviews and performance reviews from compensation. I think compensation should be tied to um, 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 what's happening in the marketplace, and the Office of Church Staff Finances, the folks who work on the compensation can help you set up appropriate pay ranges and compensation structures that help you address compensation in a thoughtful way, and can help you think about what um, uh, fair and just raises look like over the course of time. And I know in this latest economic environment in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic that a lot of congregations are just struggling to meet, maybe struggling to meet payroll, and compensation increases may not be on the table this year at all. All right, so what happens when things go wrong? All right, so you want to separate that from the from your annual review process. Um, I would, if things are going wrong with your employee when you're doing your daily check-ins and your check-ins, and it's clear that the goals aren't being met or there are problematic behaviors, you want to address those immediately. You don't want to wait and let them build up. You need to address them now. And it's human nature to want to avoid conflict and difficult conversations. And so when you notice that things are problematic or people aren't meeting their goals, then it oftentimes coincides with problems in the employee's personal life. Things may be going on, or our own, we're just naturally adverse to conflict, so we just don't want to deal with them now. And you think to yourself, oh, you know, I'll wait and see if something else happens and then I'll deal with it. My strongest recommendation is deal with them now. Don't let things build up over time, because even in the absence of communication, you're communicating something. So if your employee isn't hearing from you that this behavior or not meeting goals, um, if you're not that to your employee, you're giving the implicit message that it's okay to engage in these problematic behaviors. It's okay not to meet your job responsibilities. So I think it's important to address those things up front. You're going to want to create a performance improvement plan, which can be simply identify a simple memorandum that says, here are the problematic behaviors, here are the unmet goals, you need to address them in this way, here's how you're going to fix them and when you're going to fix them by. Short, simple, and very direct. And you're going to have the employee, you're going to meet with the employee, you're going to talk to the employee about this, you're going to have the employee sign and date the document saying, I understand that I need to meet these goals or to correct these policy infractions or behaviors, and if not, they'll lead to further disciplinary action, implementation, or termination of employment. And sometimes your employees want to sign the document because they're defensive. That's okay. You're still going to give the employee a copy of the document. You're going to sign and date it saying, I met with the employee on this date and time. The employee refused to sign, and put a copy in the personnel file. And then you're not going to wait to visit this. You're not going to wait 2 months to revisit this. You're going to make sure that you're in communication with your employee at their weekly check-ins to make sure that things are back on track. So I think of feedback, giving continuous feedback to your employee as one way that we can practice equity. And I take this from Taquina Boston, who is a colleague of Sharon and mine on the UUA staff. And so we think of feedback as a way to practice inclusion and equity on our staff. So you can clarify expectations. It helps support performance and all of your employees' job performance and their professional growth. Giving feedback helps your staff know that you're invested in their that continuous learning and professional development, that you're aligned around what success means in this position. So people want to know that they're doing a good job. And so giving feedback frequently and consistently helps your employee understand that they're doing a good job when they're doing a good job. And it keeps the lines of communications open. And it's important that identity doesn't determine a person's ability to perform their job successfully or to advance professional workplace. By giving people lots of consistent and regular feedback, you help take the question of identity out of that loop, so that everybody has the same chance to be successful in their roles. Now, you want to avoid bias in your review processes, and this is important, and I'll just hit on these. These are some frequent type bias that may come up in your performance review um, um, forms or performance review processes, and I'll talk about each one of them very, very briefly. So the similar to me effect is when you review people who resemble you or who approach their work same way that you do, and you give them better evaluations than other folks. So this is a natural human tendency. You tend to gravitate to or like people who are more closely, who you find similar to you. Those people who went to the same schools as you, the people who have the same racial or ethnic backgrounds as you, people who are the same height or have the same eye color as you, or people who work in similar ways to you or think like you tend to give them better evaluations. So you want to avoid that sort of bias. The central tendency bias is when you review or rate in the middle of the scale. Everybody gets the same rating or everybody gets rated in the middle of the scale, when their performance clearly indicates that they should get higher or lower evaluations. I once had a supervisor tell me that that she rated all her staff as meets expectations. Nobody ever got a exceeds expectations rating. And so that would be an example of central tendency. The attribution bias is when you're attributing an employee's success to outside failings or external causes. Or let me say that again. When you're attributing the employee's success or failings to outside causes. So an employee has worked really hard on a project, but you review them and say, oh, I know that this other person was critical to the success of that project, and you overlook what the employee actually did. Or the employee is responsible for a project and they haven't met their goals, and you look, I know that you had all these other things going on and therefore you didn't meet your expectations. That's okay. What we need to do as supervisors is to hold our employees responsible for making their goals. A recency effect bias is when you give minor events that have happened recently more weight than more important things that have happened in the past. So so you want to think about, when you're putting together reviews, what has your worked on over the course of the year? What projects have they worked on? Am I taking something that's recently more heavenly than something that might have happened 6 months ago? So let's say the employee had a problem a month ago, but up until the past month, they've been great. Don't just focus on that thing that happened most recently. Contrast effect is when you review or rate a person against their peers rather than against the job or their job description. And this happens all the time. Why is everybody else on my team able to get things done when you can't? This is not about the other people on the team. This is about your employee, and are they getting things done on there compared to their job description? And then the halo effect is when you let one aspect of the employee's performance overshadow anything else that they've done. So let's say they've done one project really, really, really well, but they have problems in a lot of other places, but you still give them a fantastic rating. That would be the halo effect, because you're letting that one thing overshadow all of the other problematic areas. So how can you avoid some of these biases? Think about making sure that your employee has met their goals on time. Have they met them in an ethical way? Think seriously about your employee's role and how the team has um, has made contributions to the employee's success or not. What are things that get into the way? Could your employee have acted differently or achieved different outcomes if they behaved differently, or if they used different tools, for example? Um, Did your employee approach the work in a way that was different from how you would have approached that problem or that project? Because it's not always about how they got it done, but it's about what they've delivered in the end. So keep some of these things in the back of your head as you're developing reviews. And make sure you're paying attention to those struggles and those accomplishments that have happened over the course of the year, large and small, and not just the most recent things. And then Susan Beaumont, who I mentioned before, who's with the Congregational Consulting Group, has some great materials on supervision, avoiding bias, developing performance, thoughtful performance materials, and taking into account cultural differences and bias as we work through about really, it can be a very fraught area um, for folks as they're paying attention to human resources in their work. I'm going to give you a couple of Rob's rules. These are some of the things that I think about when I think about HR. So supervisors, focus on your output and not activity. So it doesn't matter necessarily how much time or how busy somebody is, especially in this coronavirus time where so many folks are working from home. I don't spend a lot of energy worried about how much time somebody is doing something. What have they gotten accomplished? My question is, did you meet your deliverables? Um, when I ask my staff, what are you going to deliver at the end of the day? What output will you have done? What projects will you have completed? What milestones will you have made progress on at the end of the day? That's what I want to focus on, not how much time it takes them or how they're doing it. And the corollaries is, it's not about FaceTime anymore. It used to be when we supervised staff that we had to watch and that we were paying attention to who was in their chair and that they were doing their work and that people were putting in their hours. That's not so important anymore. It's what's been accomplished, and especially when so many folks are working virtually these days or working through Zoom, it's not about FaceTime. And remember, it's about the outcomes and not the methods, unless the methods cause harm. So people have lots of different ways of approaching their work. And as a supervisor, I don't care how they approach their work. I'm grateful that people are bringing their different gifts, their different insights, and the different ways that they approach their work to their projects. So if one person approaches it differently than another, that's fantastic. That helps our team. That's better for our team when we do that. But you want to make sure the methods don't cause harm. And there's a whole other conversation that we could have about that. I won't dig too deeply there. Another one of my rules for supervision and HR is make sure you're creating space for your staff to learn. This could be through professional development funds or just time to learn and engage in the work in new and different and creative ways. Um, and this is a way to develop your staff. And supervisors need to be intentional about this. It's not happened by accident. So we who supervise staff need to create time and space for our staff to be able to learn new things. Supervisors should, and employers should celebrate important events, milestones, and team wins for your staff. And these could be little things, how do you recognize people for good work done? Oftentimes people think about HR work as human resources work as the people who put on parties. Our party work is very small, but the important work is to recognize people, to recognize when they've done really good work. And how does that happen? By practicing gratitude and practicing that gratitude publicly. So say thank you people, do it in public ways. It doesn't have to be with gifts or gift cards or banners or posters or parties or that, but sometimes a simple thank you for someone's hard work, the time they've put in, the thoughtfulness or the creativity or energy that they've done is really is enough in so many cases. And ask your staff how they like to be thanked for their hard work. Certain people are motivated by different things. So talk to your staff, check in with them. And so those are the basics of HR that I wanted to leave you with today. I have resources here for you that I've mentioned. The Office of Church Staff Finances at the UUA is a really fantastic place to start. Jan Gartner can help you with HR and compensation issues, all kinds of staffing and comp issues. Her email address is jgartner@uua.org. Jim Sargent can lead you or direct you on all things insurance related, and he'll connect you with the right folks. Zap him an email, jsargent@uua.org. This could be health insurance, life insurance, disability insurance, dental insurance. And then Linda Rose is our UUA retirement plan director. And if you have questions on the retirement plan, she's a great person to contact. And here's the link for the Office of Church Staff Finances. I don't have a link here for your congregational field staff. Sharon and the folks in the Mid-America region are superb resources, and they should, the folks in Mid-America can be a first call for you, and they will connect you with either the right people or point you in the right direction or help you think through moments of conflict or difficult HR related issues too. And there's a couple of books I like that I'll leave you with. Bloss's Church Guide to Employment Law. Richard Hammer's Church and Clergy Tax Guide is a Bible, is a type of Bible for those of us in HR. Gil Rendell and Susan Beaumont's When Moses Meets Aaron is the other Bible. This is really important book. If you had to buy one of these books, Gil Randall Beaumont's When Moses Meets Aaron is the first book I would start with. I touch it every day when I go into my office to give me good fortune when I'm doing my work. And Westing's Church Staff Handbook is another resource that you might find useful. And so any questions that you may have, feel free to reach out to me. I'm Rob Mola. I'm the Director of Resources at the UUA. And you can contact me at humanresources@uua.org, and there's my phone number. And I'll do my best either to get back to you or connect you with the right folks who can answer your questions. Thank you very much. Sharon?
If you could just stop screen share, Rob. I just have one question for you.
You betcha.
I think one of the most, and I'm sure most people are like, woo, that was a lot, Rob. So first of all, thank you. That was really comprehensive. I'm impressed. I learned a lot. Actually, I was like, oh, I have someone I need to talk to. And oh, that's why I made that mistake. So thanks. But also, you know, I so often talk to people who they fire someone maybe a year later and they're like, oh, we let things go the first month, the second month. Do you have any thoughts about, a lot of organizations have a kind of like, what do they call it? The first 3 months you're on a performance, what's that called?
A probationary period or
Yes.
an orientation period.
Do you think that's a good idea?
Yes and no. So
Okay.
first of all, I'm not partial to the term probationary period. It feels really punitive to me. I like the orientation period, and it doesn't have to be 3 months. You can set a period of time. We use 6 months on national staff at the UUA, but what I consider the orientation period is a period of learning. So it's when you're giving your new employee lots of opportunity to learn the job, to experience the job, and then ask lots of questions, make mistakes, and you're giving feedback along the way. I mean, really deliberate constant feedback. And within that period of time, I think it's really helpful to be able to say, look, we're going to take a really close look at how you're getting along here and whether things are working out. And if things aren't working out in this first 6 months, no harm, no foul, we're just going to say goodbye. I think what you don't want to do in that time is if things go wrong, 4 or 5 months in or whenever it is, say to your employee, we're letting you go because we don't think things are working out, when you've never given that employee any feedback whatsoever. But I think if you're giving constant, consistent feedback, by the end of 6 months or 3, whatever you decide your orientation period is, both you and your employee should have a really good sense of, is this working out? And then have that conversation at the end of the orientation period and say, look, how do you think things are going? Here's the kind of feedback we've been talking about. You've been struggling with this. You've been having a really, really hard time. I don't think this is going to work out. It makes or you can say it's working out great, let's keep going. But even having that orientation period as a marker, that 6-month or 3-month or whatever mark you choose, having it a formal marker can be helpful for making those decisions. I think is that looking back is, why didn't we do this earlier, right? And when so many employers know, supervisors know that they should have done it earlier, but they just haven't been deliberate about setting down and having that time, to that marker to, I'm going to make a decision now about whether I'm going to keep this employee or not. So I do think it's a good idea for that reason. I like orient period rather than probationary period. And then the other thing I would caution about there is, you can tell I have lots of opinions about HR. The other thing I would caution about there is, what you don't want to do at the end of that is, at the end of that orientation or probationary period, is promise permanent employment, to say to the employee, if you make it through this period, then you're golden, that you've got a job, we won't fire you. Because you don't want to promise that, because be a year, 2, 3 years out, somebody starts to have problems in their position and that you actually do need to let them go. But using it as a simple marker, we're going to be deliberate and mindful and about giving you lots and lots and lots and lots of feedback and lots of opportunity to learn and lots of opportunities to make mistakes. And then at the end of 4 months or 6 months to say, great, this is working, let's keep going. Or, you know what, there's been too many problems, too many issues. I just don't think you're catching on. Let's just let's just cut ties now. That gives you a nice opportunity to do that. And then, of course, you've talked about severance and you have your severance in place and you've got a little severance
and you've
package
saved
ready to
up
go.
for it, right, as a congregation.
Exactly.
The other thing I'd add is, as someone who's both been supervised and a supervisor, is it was not intuitive to me. I took classes. I took 2 classes with Susan Beaumont. I did my homework. I experimented with things, and I've recently taken 2 other classes with the Management Center. And it's hard to be a good supervisor. I mean, we haven't even got into our members supervising staff, yeeks, which is really hard, versus are you a paid person supervising another paid person, which is so much better. But it's hard to do it well, but doing well will save you the problems in the long run and help you when you do have problems anyway, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Supervision is as much of an art as science. I mean, there's certainly lots of science. There's lots of research that's worth exploring and reading if that's something that folks are interested in, or certainly if you're in a supervisory role. But there's a lot of art to it. I mean, it's trial and error, and some people are more difficult to supervise than others, just because you as a supervisor will find some people difficult to supervise because you're different types of people. It's not that the person is a bad employee necessarily. It's just you have different expectations. You have different ways of approaching the world. And when you throw in complications that may happen in a congregational setting where you have a committee supervising staff, members supervising staff, it's a whole other world of difficult. And that's where you need to be specifically and especially mindful and thoughtful about how you approach your supervision. I find it very difficult. I, like you, am a supervisor and I have a supervisor. And so, I'm in the middle and, navigating those boundaries are difficult. And I think it's really, really difficult to be supervised by more than one person when you're supervised by a committee or
Oh, I think it's
a group of
impossible.
people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what I would say to the folks who um, are engaging in this webinar is if you have a committee supervising staff, talk to your regional field staff. They can help you think through ways of doing this
We'll help
that might,
you consider a way to get one person to supervise.
yeah,
One person. That's fair.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Rob. And your canine friends have been very patient with us. I'm sure they're awaiting dinner or entertainment from you or something. So
They're definitely waiting entertainment from me, and I apologize for the dry throat, and
that's
and I'm
okay. That's
really
fine.
grateful for this time with you and the folks in the Mid-America region, and to share some of my HR work with you all.
Thank you for sharing yourself with us, and be good out there. Bye-bye.